Alrighty, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui koutou. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thanks for coming to this Puka Puka kōrero, this book panel talk. My name is Yani. I'm one of the librarians here at Te Mahanga Koroi Library. So if you don't know already, we're here to celebrate the launch of Everything That Moves Through Another, a book which has been repeatedly described as a landmark anthology. Everything That Moves celebrates the experiences of 27 mixed heritage creatives in Aotearoa. The contributors were selected through an open call for submissions, meaning that mixed heritage people of any age or experience level were able to apply. The book was published independently by Salkuth Bird Press and Pōneke's own 5 Ever Books, who are with us here tonight. Woo woo! You can purchase a copy after the session, as well as some copies of their other Puka Puka. It has been amazing to see the recognition that this anthology has received from local media, such as the spin-off, Ensemble Magazine, RNZ, and Wellington Access Radio. Nkhaya and I actually had a really cool interview with Amy from Wellington Access Radio, and you can find that on their website. So Jennifer Chook is our editor-in-chief, and she was inspired to create this anthology based on her own experiences of being mixed Welsh European and Hong Kong Chinese. In the editor's note, she writes, "Growing up, I was often the only mixed heritage person in the room. My experience was made up of people asking whether I was adopted, where I was from, or why I didn't look like any member of my family. My experience of being mixed was one of constant observation and scrutiny, and I often didn't have anyone to talk to about it." Jennifer's experience is definitely one that I resonate with, as I'm sure with many of the other contributors. And speaking of contributors, I'm now going to turn to our panel, and we're each going to give a brief introduction of ourselves, who we are, and what we usually write when asked to give our ethnicity on official forms. So I'll start us off. So Namaste, Yani Widjaja. My name is Yani. I'm a librarian here, but I'm also one of the authors in this anthology. And I have a background in social anthropology, but this is the first time I've written something that's been officially published. So very exciting for me. Woo. On official forms, I usually write that I'm Pākehā mixed Indonesian, and then sometimes I'll chuck in Chinese in there as well, just to confuse people.
Ayubowan, maginam romesh dissanayake, venakam yen pere romesh dissanayake. Hi, my name is Romesh. I am a writer, poet, chef from Te Whanganui-a-Tara. On my paternal side, I am Sri Lankan Sinhalese, and on my maternal side, I am kōrero, which is a group of displaced ethnic Koreans in Central Asia. What I usually put on forms is other. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou, ko Nkhaya Paulsen-Moore tōku ingoa. He uri ahau no Ngāti Maru ki Hauraki, ngā ruahine, Ngāti Pūkenga, me Āwherika ki te Tonga. I'm Nkhaya, and I'm Māori South African. I typically put New Zealand Māori, because that's a really easy option for forms, but if it's there, African as well. And if I feel like being more specific, I just put Cape Coloured, which is my subculture from South Africa. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Emma, and on my dad's side, I'm ethnically largely Austronesian, which is largely the Aboriginal people from Taiwan, and my mum is Malaysian Chinese. And on forms, I'll usually tick other Asian. Yeah. Oh, and I'm a novelist and a slam poet. Yeah.
Kia ora. So our first question is, have you always identified yourself in this way? And if not, do you remember when you started articulating your ethnicity for yourself?
Okay, they're all looking at me for some reason. I didn't really consider myself as mixed race until more recently. It's actually kind of funny talking about it like this because I spent so much time having the biggest racial identity crisis, which is why I wrote this book. My first novel is all about race and about that understanding of oneself in relation to racial identity and where one really comes from. I always hated being asked where I was from growing up because I always just wanted to say here. And when someone said, no, where are you really from? Where are you from? Where are your parents from? It just really got annoying quite quickly. I remember being a kid and seeing those forms and just crossing them out or not filling them in or putting in random ones just to in tiny, really useless acts of rebellion. And I think it took a long time to come to terms and also reach a state of peace with how race can fit in with other forms of identity, but also not let it define me as a person.
I have always known I was Māori and South African. It was really important to my parents that I understood where I came from, but I grew up in South Africa for 9 years, so being divorced from one side of my cultural heritage made me feel like I was claiming something but not really living it. I pretty much didn't identify with being Māori until I was in my early 20s and I got into Māori student politics at university, and that was when I was really wrapped around in a community of people who said, you don't need to have the experience if you've got the Māoriness in you. That's all you need to be a part of us. And that was a really healing experience, is knowing I didn't have to grow up in Aotearoa to be Māori, and there's the stereotype of who gets to claim that they're the most Māori. And for me, it was just, I don't speak te reo. I didn't really grow up here lots, but I'm here, and that was all they wanted from me. And my South African side, the Cape Coloured group is really big. I didn't really get along with other people from my culture in South Africa, and it wasn't that I was ostracised, it was more that I felt very isolated. I wanted to be Māori so bad that I ended up accidentally alienating the actual other half of myself that I could have been when I was in South Africa. And it's only been recently that I've really gotten back into it and talking to my mum and my grandparents and understanding what that means for us, especially as they moved to Aotearoa in the 70s to escape apartheid and having to process a lot of the generational trauma that comes from identifying as Cape Coloured. But it's an ongoing journey, learning.
Kia ora. I can really relate to having a more recent reclamation and joining a group as well. I've recently gotten into Indonesian gamelan, which is traditional orchestra, and also got the opportunity to take Indonesian lessons. And that's been a really healing experience to make that that conscious choice to acknowledge your ethnicity. And I think when I was younger, I did not feel that I could claim being Indonesian because of how I look and how I sound, and also because people around me could not tell that I was Indonesian, and so it was not something that I felt comfortable doing. But it's been really amazing, I think, being an adult and being able to process all of that stuff and making conscious choices around who I want to be and become. It's super healing. What about you, Romesh?
I mean, similar to everyone else here, is migrant kid moving here when I was 8 years old. You don't want to stick out, right? You just want to fit in. So because I look kind of ambiguous as well, I've often lied about my identity, and I've said I was like Mexican or Spanish or whatever is like, you know, more palatable. And then it's a journey. Like there's you get through a process of like not claiming your identity, and then really claiming your identity and performing your identity, and then hopefully to a place where you don't feel the need to perform it and you just are those identities. I also want to add that like the mixed or half caste label is quite loaded. You know, if we think about a person who's like part Irish or part Scottish, we wouldn't include them in this collection, or we wouldn't be having the same kind of discussion. So I just want to add that caveat. When we say mixed, when we talk about mixed people, we have an idea of what that looks like, which is not necessarily true. Just because we're all mixed doesn't mean we have some kind of like common thing. We have come from very different cultures.
Yeah, totally. So my next question is, have there been times in your life where you felt that you did not want to disclose your mixed ethnicity? If so, what do you think that says about the wider attitudes in society?
I'm going to get in so much trouble. So basic history. Was born in Aotearoa, lived here until I was 9, and then I moved to South Africa, and then came back to Aotearoa when I was 18 on my own. And I did not want to talk to any other South Africans when I was here. I think I got a sense that the general vibe in Aotearoa is that South Africans have a very shaky reputation, and I didn't want to associate myself with white South Africans. So I stayed away from a lot of the South African groups here, even though it might have made my reintegration here a lot easier. But yeah, often if I tell people I'm South African, I will say, I am coloured South African. It's not the same as the white South Africans. Very sorry if anyone watching this is like, wow, that's rude, but yeah, it happens quite a lot. And then I get questions like, what do you think about the crime? Like, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? It's like, I don't want to talk about that. That's not the experience I had growing up. I had a really lovely time there. So, yeah, that's why I usually typically drop South African away from my identity when I'm here.
This conversation is making me really think about that loadedness behind the word mixed and what we think of as mixed race. I was very hesitant to put myself into this anthology, and I only did because the editor reached out to me. But I never really thought of myself as mixed because we often think mixed means white and something else, or mixed from different continents, whereas I suppose I would be mixed but from within the same continent. So I never really thought I was mixed, but how do we even define that kind of thing, and why should we put limitations on that? I feel like I felt like viable to go into this collection is I felt mixed in my experience, so I felt mixed in my cultural identity more so than my ethnic one. So speaking from that perspective, yeah, I definitely didn't feel proud or a connection with any form of like ethnic identity growing up, and from any side of that, I just pushed it all away and just wanted to fit in and not talk about race. And I even remember, even as early as my first couple of years at uni, I remember publishing articles in Salient saying that I didn't want to be seen for race, which is kind of ironic when now I spend a lot of time talking about it and writing about it, which is maybe coming back to what Romesh was saying about you get to a point of comfort when you're performing or when you want to suddenly say everything you've never said, and then you kind of go out the other side of that. But it was just never something I wanted to talk about. And even, to be honest, now I'm getting to that point where I'm kind of getting done talking about it. This might be one of the last times I talk about it. But Yeah, I just think that that journey's so common for a lot of us, but not necessarily talked about often.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, if this is what you're getting at, I think it also shows perhaps there's a lack of understanding about the differences between, culture, ethnicity, race. They're all like quite complicated things. And sometimes you don't want to talk about, or you don't want to expose yourself when the discussion doesn't feel very productive or you don't feel understood. There's a lack of understanding of complexity. Yeah.
I think I was the same, Emma. I was really hesitant to submit to this collection and put off writing. I didn't know what to write for it. Where do you start? And should I even be explaining myself in this way? But I got to a place of whatever I write is going to be of the mixed experience. I don't have to give a 101 to the mixed experience through my thing. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, by virtue of being mixed, you have a mixed experience. Yeah. Yeah, I guess on that that note about submitting for this collection, the actual call was about asking for creative works that spoke to your identity and experiences as a mixed heritage person. So how did each of you interpret that brief from hearing the brief, and then what led you to create the pieces that you actually did?
I just submitted some random pieces that I had. I didn't really go with the brief in this case, to be honest. I didn't really know how to interpret that in this, so that's...
Yours is really good, though. You should talk about
Yeah.
Mine came from a desire to explain a bit more about my South African heritage. I feel like there's a lot of really great literature in New Zealand about Māori people, writers, experiences. I wanted to explain a bit about the people that I grew up with, and I don't think we have a lot of exposure in Aotearoa. If anything, a lot of people maybe don't understand or know that South Africa has a really large racial and ethnic diversity, and Cape coloured culture is really interesting because it sprung from mixed race people in South Africa. So it was like having a catch-all term for people who have all sorts of different heritage. But yeah, that was my goal. That was my goal for the brief.
Yeah. I guess for me, I ended up talking about my name, the story of my name. I wrote an essay. That was my sort of main concept, but I guess I also explored how my relationship with my name changed, my relationship with my ethnicity changed as I found out more stuff. But yeah, when I heard the brief, to be honest, I was very excited because I thought, this is the first time that somebody's actually making something like this. There was a real gap in the literature. I don't know, in society, there's a real gap about talking about multi-ethnicity in general. So, yeah, I was really excited. So I thought maybe what we might do is read a little bit from some stuff we've written, which is either in the book or not in the book, and talk about why we picked that particular excerpt and why it's meaningful to your experience. Okay. Oh, all right. So this is from the end of my essay in the book, which is called We is for Widjaja. Discovering more about my family and ethnicity-specific history felt like a great breaking open of my life. My view of my identity was now stained by this dark mark in Indonesia's collective history. In the days and weeks which followed, I remember walking around campus with the knowledge of 1965 hanging like a spectre in my mind. I was grieved and disturbed, but there was also an uneasy guilt that sat within me. Here I was on the other side of the world reading about these things through a textbook. I was a continuation of a family line that had survived, but I had not lived through the violence myself, and I had no personal ties to Indonesia except by name. Once again, I was faced with the familiar feeling of confusion towards my ethnicity, except that now I could see that this confusion was reflected across generations in my family tree. My father's experience of being Indonesian was also clouded by the silence of my grandparents, and my grandparents were grappling with the reality where being Chinese was essentially outlawed. Each generation was engaging with confusion, uncertainty, and an unnamableness that made our Chinese-Indonesian identity inherently muddied. My view of my name, once a childish pride, had been changed irreparably. So I guess I'm talking about the political events which contributed to my Chinese family name being changed to an Indonesian sounding one. And yeah, it was, I guess that's meaningful to me because in that paragraph and in my thinking, I realized that my confusion was not just my own, and it was also not my fault for being confused, for feeling alienated. I could see across my family where things had gone wrong, and you know, like it was no one's fault. It wasn't my parents' fault that I was raised apart from my family, and my grandparents were doing the best thing that they could amidst a time of great political turmoil. So I think, yeah, I have a lot of compassion for my family and the sacrifices they made. And I guess now I have the privilege of being able to reflect on all of these things as a young person in the generation that I am. And I can make choices with that knowledge.
I'm just going to read part of my entry, and it does contain themes of suicide, so if you're uncomfortable, please tune out or make space for yourself. When we first arrived, we gorged ourselves on salt and vinegar and ready salted, and mince and cheese, and chicken drumsticks bubbling in honey and soy and sesame inside an oven-proof bag. We had bratwurst from New World with vinegar, and chimchi and pilmeni, cutlets and paripu and isotel dala with $2 chips and loose cheese rolls and coleslaw. Auntie Gulia made a tower of juicy mante and with globules of fat that soaked into our skin, glistening. Those days are filled with the most precious light. Head to the sky, I was always running. I go back there often, under that plum tree. That's where I am. I'm mine. But sometimes I can't tell if I have a tendency to ruin a good thing, or if there's a natural tendency for good things to be ruined in my recollection of them. I want to tell you about how that same year Byron's mum hung herself off the basketball hoops at school, and we heard the rumours, and what did we do to console him? We rode our skateboards sitting down, we drank soy milk, we watched Rush Hour 2, we played RuneScape, and we flicked our status between online and away on MSN Messenger. Sometimes we sat next to him on the benches at school, by the fountains, one hand bouncing a basketball, the other slumped over his shoulders, sobbing. I want to tell you about how my parents sat me down pre-separation, preemptively pleading. I want to tell you about how fast Babule and Det showed up like cavalry from Kazakhstan, how Archie floated in like a feather, a flower, a herky-jerky tyrant? What about how we bounced around? From state housing flat to Salvation Army flat to leaky Arlington flat, like we were on the run, sinking, processing, sinking. And what about high school? A different kind of mean. And I don't mean Wainui was perfect, but the older you get, the more shade enters your vision, the spectacle of dried blood, from maroon to mahogany, the drips, felt tips and fluoro replaced by the permanence of ink, and boys laughed at the size of my shoes, comparing their thighs next to my thighs at assembly because they are outwardly seeming men, and I was still just a child, still chasing Pokemon, still falling out of bed, still collecting bugs and poking holes in the tops of pickle jars, and there is still paper, greenish with the slime of time, stuck to the ceilings of the toilets at school that drips and drips and drips like stalactites in dimly lit caves. What are scars if not tally marks on the skin? What I want to tell you is how I remember the specifics, but I can't get the gist. The past collates over dial-up. Memories are sticky and malleable like putty, picking up dirt and debris along the way. How can I rely on past perceptions when they turn garish, cartoonish after a while? Don't you think it's funny how recall has this uncanny ability to service your story? A childhood filtered by the desires and discontents of the present. But when is it time to stop looking? Why do I keep going back? How do you know when an old life is over and a new one has begun, and there is no looking back, and it's time to conceive a new order? Thank you.
My story is the form of a glossary, so it's like dictionary definitions. So I'm going to pronounce them and then tell you how they're pronounced, pretty much. 5. Kham. Guttural G followed by adjective. Basically, the complete opposite to sturvy, fancy. People don't typically use this to describe white or black South Africans. It was a term used against the coloured community. To be kham is to be ghetto, hood, poor. You can also use it to describe a certain type of Afrikaans. Kham Afrikaans is associated with the lower class. Savoured, sweet or sugary, is pure Afrikaans, which is taught in schools and makes you sound like a plaasmeisie or a farm girl. And I know that because someone once jokingly told me I spoke Afrikaans like a plaasmeisie. I would say don't use this word, but I'm not the only coloured person who speaks Afrikaans, and some coloured people have reclaimed it as a point of pride. So if you're coloured and you identify with the term, you roll with it, that's all good. If not, don't use it. Pretty straightforward. 8. MXM. You know that sound you make when you suck your teeth? That. Onomatopoeia. You've discovered that we like mishmashing languages together in South Africa. We took it an extra step further and decided to create a word that sounds like the disapproving sound your auntie makes when she asks you if you're married yet, and you reply, "No, not yet, auntie," often coupled with a dismissive hand wave. You could also use to denote displeasure, irritation. I have a feeling the spelling has something to do with how our indigenous languages spell clicks and consonants, but I actually don't know. That's just my wild guess. I'm about as clueless as you are. 1. Coloured. You know how to pronounce this. Descriptor. A racial group and ethnicity in South Africa, but also our umbrella term for mixed race people. I'm Cape coloured through my mum's family. Coloured heritage is derived from Dutch colonialists, Malay slaves, and the Khoisan, one of the indigenous groups of Southern Africa. We also have ancestry from Southeast Asia, South India, and other bits of Europe, mostly Britain for obvious reasons. It's not offensive to call a coloured person coloured in South Africa if they identify as such, which is curious, since we got the term from the apartheid regime. It was the apartheid government's catch-all for anyone they couldn't identify as black, African, or white. I guess they got lazy and thought, fuck it, let's just call them coloured. We've since reclaimed the term, and now we're a unique ethnicity with our own culture. Fun fact, a few centuries ago, we decided that standard Afrikaans was boring and came up with Kaaps and Arabic Afrikaans. Funny, because the harmful coloured stereotype is that we're low class, crass, violent, not educated, and yet our contribution to the language is so influential, our dialects have become a quintessential part of South African culture.
Okay, I'm going to read something from my novel as opposed to from the book because, as I said earlier, I didn't really submit to the theme. So I will read the part of this book that gave me the reason to submit to this collection. It's a part that I've never read before out loud, but it's kind of, it's on, yeah, you'll see it, I guess it's on theme. Okay, it's called Pima County. 2 weeks after Grandpa's heart attack, I'm lying in bed, half asleep when Mum calls me. I expect it to be more news about Grandpa, who still hasn't left the hospital. The doctors say he's too fragile to go home right now. Ear pressed against the phone, I'm scared for what Mum's about to say. The DNA company emailed. They say they've got a backlog, so all test results have been delayed, Mum tells me. A jolt runs through me. It's been nearly a month since we sent the DNA test off, and at this point I'm having doubts about whether I even want to know the outcome. Most of the time I'm worried about Grandpa. I hardly have emotional room to ask yet more questions about where I'm really from. Why don't you want to know? Henry asks me when I tell him how I feel about it one night at dinner. I think I'm scared of what we might find, I reply honestly. Why? Henry asks. I realize I don't know. I spend a few days thinking about it before coming to the conclusion that I'm scared about having to build a whole new identity for myself. I've built myself based on the scraps I have, being born in New Zealand, on Dad being from Singapore, on Mum being a third-generation New Zealander, and now on Mum being adopted, on coming from nowhere. Even though I'm the one that wanted the test, an unexpectedly large part of me likes the ambiguity. I like not having all the answers, of getting to write my own story on a blank page. It's another 2 weeks before the results actually come through. They were emailed directly to Mum, so she forwards them to the rest of the family. My fingers hesitate over the trackpad. All my thoughts rush my brain and I have to block them, shut them up so I can look at the screen. The page takes a few moments to load and I stare at it so hard that my eyes hurt. 1. Austronesian Oceania, 40.2%. 2. Austronesian Southeast Asia, 28%. 3. Sino-Tibetan and Himojic Southeast Asia, 7.8%. 4. Central America, 6.7%. 5. Tuva, 5.5%. 6. Central Southern China, Yunnan and Guangxi, 4.4%. 7. Pima Country, the Sonora, 3.7%. 8. Western Siberia, 1.6%. 9. Southeastern India, 1.6%. 10. Bougainville, 0.4%. My first thought, I don't even know what Austronesian means. My second thought, I definitely don't need to worry about this test changing my self-perception. My third thought, I'm relieved and I feel guilty about it. I Google Austronesian and discover that it's a loose term to describe many peoples that make up the Aboriginal Taiwanese. Austronesian people are native to Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Madagascar and have spread out all over the world. It's highly likely that my Austronesian blood comes from China, and I wonder if a less comprehensive test would have just said Chinese. I Googled Tuva and find that it means South Siberian. Pima Country means Native American. Bougainville is in Papua New Guinea. Considering the potential paths of my ancestors, the Pima Country is the most perplexing. I can't help but be a bit happy about my Central American DNA, particularly because the test highlighted that it probably means either Mexico or Guatemala. It shouldn't matter. It's not like my proclivity for Spanish originates from my DNA, but the thought of Central America being even a tiny bit of me makes me smile. I screenshot the results and send it to Henry. He replies almost immediately with a wow emoji and an all-caps message. How do you feel? I reply quickly, my fingers slipping on my phone screen. Fine, talk later, XX. Then return to my research. I never expected that the DNA results would be confusing to me. I think I expected something clear and straightforward, 80% Chinese, 20% Portuguese, or something like that. But my dawning realization from these results is how inadequate the term Chinese even is. China is a huge landmass, home to more than 1 billion people. It's made up of hundreds of ethnic groups. People in northern China and southern China don't even look the same. It's only in the Western world that Chinese is a homogenous image, a pale-faced, slant-eyed stereotype. Even if I were 100% Chinese, my mixed blood would make me less Chinese to the Western gaze. The results only seem to confirm that DNA means nothing. DNA was never the answer. It tells me nothing about who I am as a person, except that I am a mix of things and my history is ambiguous, and I already knew that. I'm glad I know now, though. Now, if people ask me what I am, I can say it's complicated. If they persist, I can throw all my ethnicities at them and let them realize that they can't typecast me through them. I can almost imagine it. Me at the gallery, some lanyard-wearing bearded tourist pushing their nose to my face with an easy, "So what are you then?" And me, smiling broadly. I'm a mix of Austronesian, Chinese, Tibetan, Peruvian, Central American, and Siberian. Maybe it's a stupid thing to take pleasure in. Maybe I would have become a better person if the test had labeled me 100% Chinese. That would force me to be proud, to overcome my internalized racism faster. It's definitely something I'm in the process of trying to overcome. It would have been better to dive straight in. Instead, I found a new pathway out.
I love that line. I'm glad it doesn't have to change my self-perception. Yeah, that's great. Cool. So, next question. Does your family know that you have written in this book or written about your ethnicity more generally, and how have they received that?
I actually wrote another book before this. It's a novel called When I Opened the Shop, and it's of a mixed heritage protagonist and explores their identity and a lot of my family history, like family anecdotes are in that, and that was really special to be able to share with my family, to see, you know, the kōrero saram side is very niche, and outside of my family I haven't met anyone else from there. So to see those words, those recipes on the page was like a form of archive for me, or if, it's like just to say you're here or that we exist. And yeah, I think that was really nice. But how'd you go with your book?
My family were a bit hesitant on the prospect of me writing a novel that was even partially based on my real ancestry. I wrote 7 drafts of this novel, and with every draft the family became further from my real family because they read draft 2 and were quite upset about it. Not so much about the discussion of ethnicity, just more they were afraid that they were seeing themselves in it. Because I think it is natural that you put some of yourself into anything you write, but I did want this to be fiction, and it is fiction. So I think a lot of the issues that sprung up of that for me was more avoiding the mixing with personal life, even if some of the ancestry facts in there are true.
Yeah. My parents both know. My dad was really supportive of it. My mum was more hesitant, and that was just around the complexities of, being coloured and all the different ethnicities that come into it. I don't know. I think it was just a bit of being vulnerable. Like for her, me writing about our culture was a reflection of how she raised me in it. So I've been very gentle and been like, you don't have to read it, it's okay. But you just need to know that it's out there, because I didn't want to put it into a book if she didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like an ethic of care there. I feel the same about, I think my piece is very exposing of political history, which is barely talked about in Indonesia. So I think in my case it was almost dangerous to write about the stuff that I was writing about, and I did talk to my dad about it quite a bit, and he said, like, you know, this can affect if you want to live in Indonesia because you're putting your name out there. But I checked with him and his name is in it. But I think that, yeah, you don't want to make your parents feel like, the last thing I would want is for my parents to feel that they're to blame or anything for my experiences. It's just how it happened, and and this is my way of like processing it. But it's interesting because you do feel the generational differences. Yeah, I don't know about you guys if you felt that at all, but yeah. Cool. So my other question is, do you affiliate differently to each of your cultures, like more to one or the other? What is your experience of that?
This is a hard one. I feel like I'm still not fully done on this journey. I still kind of identify as other Asian in a way because I find it quite complicated to put more specific labels on things. I'm more inclined to say that I have some Chinese heritage, I have some Malaysian heritage, than to say I am this, because that feels like quite a different thing. And to me, being a New Zealander and being Asian feels both more true and more genuine to me than any of the specific ethnicities in that. And I think even if that's not a perfect answer, like that's what I have found peace with, and I think I'm still open to that changing over my life.
I think I've got to a pretty good point with it where you're not just thinking of in binaries of like I'm either this or I'm this. You can be both things. And I said at the launch for this book a couple months ago that, you know, as a mixed race person, you can often contain contradictory identities. But it's also a good exercise in how two things can coexist. For me, food was like how I understand the world. And on our dinner table growing up, there was like a squid curry, a Russian beetroot soup, and mashed potatoes. So it was all like mixed up, but we didn't think of that as weird. Like we'd eat like a roast with kimchi, and that's just like a standard family meal. So yeah, I think you only feel different when you start comparing yourself to other people who aren't like you. But it is what it is. Yeah.
Wasn't expecting that. I think, do I affiliate differently? I guess that for me, I've accepted that I will always be a New Zealander first. I mean, that could change, but so far as I know, because I was born here and I was raised here, that is always going to be a very different experience of Indonesians who were born and raised in Indonesia. And the other thing is that even if I did live in Indonesia for a long period of time, because of how I look, I would always be called a bule or a foreigner. So that's just something that I've kind of had to accept. But it is interesting, being a mix and having multiple cultures. You're able to see the differences in each culture, and I think particularly for my mix, it's like, the philosophies and ideas around family and being an individual are very different, and I can kind of hold both, and I can express both as well, and that's very freeing.
Can I just add to that? Have you guys experienced this? Like growing up, it was very clear that I wasn't from here. So I'm like, okay, I'm Sri Lankan, and I'm gonna go back to Sri Lanka, and I'm gonna connect with my people. When I got to Sri Lanka, they were like, they thought I was Japanese, and I'm like, I'm not accepted by these people either. So you're just like, you're in this in-between space, and it's really hard to navigate. Have you experienced that?
Yeah. I have a term for that. I call that cultural chameleon. Yeah. It's, I don't know, I wouldn't call it privilege, but for me, it's been really easy to say, oh yeah, I'm Māori, like totally, because people will just say, oh yeah, you've got brown skin, you have really good pronunciation of the reo. Yeah, you could be Māori. And in South Africa, there's so many of us who are either my skin tone or darker that I've also found it very easy to just integrate. But within those smaller circles, more niche circles of people, then picking out like, oh, you're not actually one of us. My accent was a really big marker when I was growing up in SA. I got made fun of for pronouncing the name Kelly because they pronounce it Kelly. I don't know why that was the particular one that stood out, but it's always been in my brain. There's this weird dichotomy of I really want to belong, and I do belong, but the people that I belong to don't want me. So what do I do with that? I just either force myself into the space and become this performative version of my identity, or I break away and be like, no, actually stuff you guys. I'm just going to be whoever I want to be. And I don't know, it's hard because you just want the acceptance a lot of the time.
I also definitely experienced that. People always thought I was ambiguous looking, and anywhere I ever went in Asia, they thought I was from there. And then when I was in Latin America, particularly in Mexico, people also thought I was from there because I looked like some of the Aboriginal people there. I actually had quite a funny experience, which was when this white guy came up to me and was trying to ask me out, and he was trying to I don't know what he was trying to do, but it's quite funny and mostly in retrospect. But he was like, "You're so pretty. I love Latina girls." And I was just like, man, if you're gonna racially fetishize, I thought that was quite funny. So yeah.
The final question: is there a part of your ethnicity that you feel you're reclaiming, and what does that feel like? Or a part of yourself, maybe,
I said before that in a lot of ways I'm still unsure, but in the process of writing over the last few years, I have become really proud of my heritage as a fourth-generation Chinese New Zealander on my dad's side, because that is a history that is largely not talked about, and they were some of the market gardeners and early immigrants, and I am proud of that history. I think there was a lot of hardship and struggle, a lot of racism, and also a lot of really beautiful connection between local iwi and Chinese back in the day, because they were both groups that were discriminated against. And I think that is a particular history that I have come to really be proud of.
Cool.
I don't know if I'd call it reclamation, more like rediscovery, because a lot of it are hidden stories from generations way before me, and it's only today that they're sharing their experiences with me about what it was like to be Māori or to be South African. And so for me, it's a process of integrating all of that into my experience. There's a particular term that people use for people who grow up in more than one country, third culture kid. And I, by some fluke of destiny, am a second generation third culture kid. So there's a lot of like weaving and mixing around and trying to figure out who we all are as a family. I like that part about the reclamation the most.
Yeah. Do you want
No.
Okay. Yeah, I guess for me, the Indonesian stuff I'm reclaiming. That's only very recently where I feel like I can actually say like, yeah, I'm Indonesian, which is quite a big thing. And I guess within that, being Chinese Indonesian, because in Indonesia there's over 300 different ethnic groups. Being Chinese Indonesian is a great privilege, I feel, that I get to explore. Being removed from Indonesia means that there's less of a political tension around that. So yeah, I'm excited to explore that part of myself and have those conversations with my family, because I think this is kind of what it comes down to, is about, it's not just us and our experience, but it's also our family and the people that make up us, and the stories that are there. I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for sharing your thoughts and your reflections. And thank you to our lovely audience for coming along tonight. I hope you've learnt something new. Thank you to Tess as well, who's helped me organise this event. She's been really amazing. This has been my first time as a little customer service librarian getting to do this. So thanks so much, Tess. We do have 5 Ever here in the corner this evening, so if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, have a flick through. They are there, as well as some of their other puka puka. But thank you once again for coming, and hope you have a lovely evening.